Good evening, everyone. We're just giving it a couple more minutes because we have some wayward souls from north of Willow Road that probably are still trying to find their way out of our parking lots. So, out of respect for the lost souls, we'll give you a couple minutes here. Oh yeah, right in my eyes. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Glenbrook South, and welcome to our College Finance Night. We are pleased that you got out of your warm, cozy homes to come out on this cold night to at least learn a little bit more about really a very important topic right now. My name's Ann LePage, and I'm the coordinator for college counseling here at Glenbrook South. And my able assistant, no, my counterpart, my mentor at Glenbrook North is your very own David Boyle from Glenbrook North. And this is our first year combining programs for the district and doing one financial aid. And I just think it's a great idea because really the topic is the same. It doesn't matter what school you attend. Some of these basics that you need to understand for the process you're about to embark on, completing the financial aid forms for college and making a choice between now and May 1st about where you'll attend with considerations to the finances involved is the same. Okay, and so it was, I think, a brilliant idea that David had that we combine these programs. So we're doing this evening for our senior parents, and we'll have another evening in March for our junior parents, which will be more like a primer to get you ready for financial aid. We have an exceptional program tonight to present to you because of our exceptional speakers. We happen to have, I would say, two of the most superior veterans in financial aid in the Chicagoland area. And I will introduce them in a minute, but I just want to go over just a few important points for you to consider regarding college search and financial aid process right now. First is, I guess, our general piece of advice we would say that is most important around this revolves around the timelines of this process. And so we planned this program early in our first week back here because early is best when it comes to completing forms and doing the things that you have to as a family do to be in good standing for best consideration for financial aid. So kind of a couple rules of thumb, and you'll hear this no matter what presentation you choose to attend tonight. You don't have to have your taxes completed to complete the FAFSA, okay? You heard it straight here. You'll hear it from our financial aid experts here. You can use last year's tax data and estimate. You don't have to know your admissions status at schools because many of you don't at this point know whether you're admitted or not to a particular school to have FAFSA information completed and forwarded to those schools. And so don't wait in this game. Wait for the tax accountant's appointment. Don't wait for the admissions letter to come. Move forward after this evening and get started on this so that you're in the best possible position to meet all the obligations that the universities require, that the state imposes, that everything else happens so that you don't miss out on any quality opportunities. You may miss out on some financial opportunities that you may well have qualified for if you miss a deadline, or if the state runs out of money, or if the university runs out of money. So being in this in a timely way is best. So you know it's no secret that the cost of a college education has increased at a greater rate than your salary has over the last decade. And for those of you, how many of you this will be your first going away to school? For how many of you will you have more than one in school next year? Anybody going to have 3 like I have this year? So my jar wasn't big enough. And if you're like most families in this country, even though you diligently saved and you made plans and you diligently accumulated that college fund, most of us are finding that it's not quite enough. There's still a pretty significant gap. And so one of the content pieces of this evening's program is that we're going to expose you to some of the things that are out there that might give you some pointers on how to cover that gap, get through those expenses, some alternatives to financing, even if you don't qualify for financial aid. So the other piece of general advice that we have really revolves around communication during this process. And yeah, I've had teenagers in my home, and I know that probably it isn't the most often easy and convenient thing to communicate about, this whole process. In fact, they're sick of talking about it, they'll tell you. However, this is really a time for families to have open and candid and frank conversations about finances. And, you know, we shelter our kids sometimes about the realities of what's going on and where the limits are. But at this particular point in this process, it's really, if you haven't already, it's really wise for you to start to express the realities about where the limits are, etc. As a part of any student's list in this process, you know you've had advice from your college counselor at North, and we advise here at South that you need to have safety schools. You need to have academic safeties. But you also need to have financial safeties, ones that are still going to meet all those requirements, provide a very excellent place to continue your student's education, but not compromise your family's entire future or your retirement or all the other things that we have to do as parents. And so have a realistic discussion about where those limits are, have a realistic discussion about loans and debt limits and what you feel is appropriate and what might be too much. And if you're finding that after those discussions the list isn't quite where you need it to be, please use us as a resource to help kind of refine those lists to be sure that you're going to have good options that are going to be financially responsible. Resources, you happen to go to schools that have an abundance of quality resources for you to help navigate this process. And so in terms of resources, what are we talking about? One is the booklet that we put together for you tonight. There's lots of additional articles that you can read through and use as a guide as you're completing things in this process, or if questions come up as you're in this process. But we'd like to warn you to be very careful about some of the unscrupulous resources that are out there. Anytime that there's great fear about anything, you'll find cottage industries start to creep up. And financial aid is no different than anything else. There are a lot of families that are very fearful about the affordability of higher education. And as a result of that, there are some unscrupulous avenues that have popped up to help you finance this education. We would just tell you, kind of caveat emptor, beware, be careful. For instance, the FAFSA is a free resource. The acronym stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. If you happen to land on a website that causes you to pay to complete your FAFSA, you've navigated to the wrong site. Anything that you can do in this process to help you maximize your potential for financial aid, you can do for free. Okay, there's no reason to pay for that. You have full access to information regarding the free information on federal sites, state sites, the college financial aid offices themselves, the resource booklet that we've just provided for you, and certainly our office, the office at Glenbrook South and the office at Glenbrook North. In addition to that, we're going to be offering some FAFSA completion nights at Glenbrook South. Ours will take place on Thursday, January 30th. It will start at 5 o'clock in the GBS library. These are open kind of labs, so if you just come in with your information, we will have the computers available for you and resources available from financial aid offices and from our office to help you physically complete your FAFSAs on site. GBN will host a similar evening on Wednesday, February 5th in their libraries, again starting at 5 o'clock. So we really encourage you to use the free resources that are available. At this particular point, I am going to explain what our evening is going to look like tonight and turn it over to our very seasoned veterans. And that doesn't mean old Jerry or Ruth, but very seasoned veterans in the area of financial aid. We're going to be running 2 sessions right now. And if you noticed earlier, all of this is being, I don't know what we call it, telecommunicated? Who knows? It's being broadcast, not only live, so some of your friends are sitting home in their pajamas right now watching us, and others are going to maybe tune into it later. And you may even find that you might want to stay in one session tonight and tune into the second session later on. They will be at your access through the website that was provided to you on our Glenbrook South homepage in the email reminder for the program. So 2 concurrent sessions will be going on. Here in the auditorium, we are going to have a thorough overview of the FAFSA, step-by-step instructions for completing it, complete with this year's new hot-off-the-press information. If this is your first time through this process, I think that this would be the appropriate session for you to attend. Jerry Zabrinsky is the Director of Financial Aid at Lake Forest College for a million years, and he will be conducting that session here in the auditorium. For those of you that have been through that process of completing the FAFSA, you've kind of earned your sea legs around completing the FAFSA. It's not that much more difficult each year, although it does, I think it improves each year in ease, etc. But you may want to attend our second session, which will be right down the hall here in our Student Activities Center. And in the Student Activities Center, Ruth Pusich is the Director of Financial Aid at Elmhurst College. And she will be covering a variety of topics in financial aid, which will include things like the federal methodology, like how is it even calculated, that EFC. She will be also covering things like understanding and how to compare your financial aid award packages when you get them, student loans, areas like that. Both of our speakers will have a little bit of time at the end of the sessions to answer any questions. If you've come here with a spouse or a partner, one can stay in here and one can go to the other, then you get a comprehensive view. You can go home and talk about it tonight, the 2 different sessions. But again, you won't miss anything if you attend one and can't attend the other, because you can tune into it via the Google Hangout that we're establishing online later on. I know we've even had families say in the past that it was really helpful to go back to Jerry Zabrinsky's presentation when they were physically doing their FAFSA to answer any questions. That'll all be available to you. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry. It will just take us a second to change presentations here. Up here, and again, the FAFSA Completion will stay in the auditorium. And for those of you that are interested in attending the alternate session, everything else you needed to know about financial aid, you can get up and you can follow Mr. McGraw and Mr. Boyle in the back, and they will take you down to our Student Activities Center. Okay? Thank you again for coming out. All right. Jared, that's your water up here.
I was watching it on the
Does
phone.
it work?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're watching on your phone?
Yeah, so I
Oh,
could just make sure that I have the right link. It's
Okay.
working beautifully. So
All right.
all he has to do is change that. I'm going to go get her started.
Beautiful.
And I think we're good.
Now that we've cleared half the house, if you'd like to get a little bit closer seat, if you're like me and can't see, feel free to move on up.
Thank you so much. I'll wait for them. That is a bright light.
Maybe I'll stand off to the side here. Thanks everyone for staying for this session. When we talk about the wonderful, exciting, sexy world of financial aid and the FAFSA, the pre-application federal student aid. Couple things before we start. I guess it finally happened. I just heard that on Tuesday, in the little town of Hell, Michigan, the high temperature was negative 17 degrees. And maybe on a related or not related note, Velveeta cheese there's a shortage of Velveeta. Oh my God. It's a good thing that we have tonight to talk about financial aid and the FAFSA. And to go into a little bit more detail about why you're sitting here and kind of what you need to do and to give you some direction in your financial aid life, at least. The FAFSA is the application that every family is completing at every college, every university across the country. It's a federal application that collects some real basic demographic and financial information that allows us really to start the process. It's by no means the end all, but it gives us a chance to kind of start to get to know you, to get some data elements literally into our system back in the office so we can start to look at that to kind of figure out where we need to go from there. What the FAFSA itself does, it's just a vehicle to collect some information from you. It doesn't necessarily tell you what you qualify for or how much. It is the financial aid office who is the expert, it rests with us. We have the full authority to eventually say, this is exactly what you qualify for from all of these places, both federal and state and the college and anything else that we might know of. Again, it starts with the FAFSA because that's what collects some of this basic information. And what it does is kind of give us an index number of sorts. It tells us where you might fall on the continuum of all the students applying for financial aid, whether you absolutely qualify for federal grants or you don't, but you qualify for state aid, or you don't, but you qualify for something from the college itself. There we go. Briefly, the overview of the FAFSA. It's available now for students who are starting in the fall of 2014. So if you've got a junior or a sophomore, it's a good time to think about what you need to do. But if you've got a senior, and that's why you're here, this is what you need to be working on, kind of as we speak. It's available at the website FAFSA.gov. Again, as Ms. LePage kind of mentioned earlier, there are some other sites out there. FAFSA.com is a site that you do not want to go to. It's a for-profit site, and it is very similar to the FAFSA.gov, but it's an organization that will, for the low price of only $99, collect your information and then share it with the federal student aid programs, which honestly you don't need to do. You can go directly to the FAFSA.gov and plug in this information yourself. And actually, the FAFSA.gov website is much easier than this other one. I did a FAFSA workshop last year, and kind of walking around some of the PCs and talking to some of the students, they would pull up the FAFSA, and I looked at some of the screens they were working on because they had questions, and it looked a little strange to me. And that's because they had Googled FAFSA, and the very first thing that came up was the kind of the sponsored link, the FAFSA.com. So be very careful with that. If you've not looked at the FAFSA before, or even if you have, it is very straightforward. It's only 7 steps long. It's signed and submitted electronically, so it's as easy as a financial aid application and process can be. It's one of the easiest out there. The FAFSA is available in 2 different formats. It's available in a paper application if you want to go that route. To do a paper FAFSA, though, you need to order one from the federal student aid programs. It takes a couple weeks to get it, and then if you actually process it by paper, it takes 6 to 10 weeks to be processed. You don't want to do that, especially these days with more and more colleges who need this information, need the FAFSA results early on in the process. You just quite literally do not have the time to do the paper FAFSA. But the FAFSA on the web is really the way to go. 99.9% of all the FAFSAs that were done electronically this year. It's nice because it's available in a couple languages, English and Spanish, and they're adding a few more very soon. It's got some nice features that we'll talk about in just a little bit, like skip logic and online editing. It's signed electronically. Both the student and the parent sign it. You get notified by email that it's been processed and sent off to the different schools. And then you have the option of going on to the site, the FAFSA on the website, to make corrections, to check the status of it. And if you're like me, I'm kind of a very visual, very tactile kind of person where I need a worksheet. I need something before I actually take it to the online. There's the FAFSA on the web worksheet, which you can print. I don't know if that was available tonight, but if it wasn't, you can actually just kind of download it. Yes, it was available, thank you. It follows the FAFSA on the web questions line by line. So you can look at what it's going to ask, jot down some of the answers, and then take it and just transfer the information to the FAFSA on the web itself. A couple of good reasons to fill out the FAFSA on the web. It's the edits, those built-in edits, that prevent a lot of costly errors. The skip logic feature is really nice because as you go through the process, depending on how you answer a particular question, if the next 10 don't pertain to you, you don't even see them. So you don't have to worry about putting a 0 or not applicable, and it really speeds the process up. It's nice on our end in a financial aid office when we get these results and we see blanks and we know it was done electronically, we don't have to follow up with you because we know that those did not apply to you, and so we don't need to say, did you mean to put a 0? Did it mean to put not applicable? The online editing feature is nice too because as you go along, it just kind of prompts you to save it periodically. You can access the FAFSA on the web 24/7 on any device these days, on a PC, on a Mac, on a tablet, on even some of the smartphones that are out there. You can access this information. The online editing feature is nice in that it prompts you to save it periodically. It's making sure that some of the answers that you're putting in, some of the questions, are appropriate kind of answers. If they're asking for a yes or no and you're putting in a number, it'll just kind of stop you. It doesn't do any judgment calls. It doesn't, when you get to the question about, your income is how much, you really want to continue with this application, it won't do that. I promise. It will just make sure that it kind of keeps you on track. The other nice thing, and we talk about some of the hot topics in financial aid, one of the other nice features is that as you go through the FAFSA, and we'll see this, a lot of the questions are income-based. So it asks you what your income was last year. At this time of year, you don't have a 2013 tax return that you can refer to. The FAFSA acts as a cheat sheet of sorts. So when you or if you did have your tax return handy, it would tell you what line items to refer to, and that's the answer that it's looking for. The nice thing, this year is that the 2013 tax return is the same as the 2012 tax return in terms of the line items. So if you have your 2012 tax return, use that. Use that to estimate the information on this application. You don't need to be exact. You need to be within a ballpark, but being within the ballpark means you're within $10,000 of your income, and information like that. So it sounds weird, but every financial aid office will tell you, we would much rather you put something down on this application now rather than wait to get more exact information later on. Again, as Ms. LePage talked about, there are some deadlines out there that if you miss a deadline by 1 minute, you could be out thousands of dollars. The other nice thing is that when you fill out the FAFSA on the web, we can get the results and you get the results almost within 24 to 48 hours. It'll tell you 72 hours maximum, but I see results the very next day for a lot of families. It's that kind of, as instant as you can possibly get. And again, the application has a lot more, the online application has a lot more detailed help. And if you have a question about what it's asking, a lot more depth to some of the answers, to some of the guidance that it provides. Oops. Oh, sorry. The IRS data retrieval tool is the way for a lot of families to take some of these income questions and populate the FAFSA that way. It's not possible to do that right now, but colleges will ask you to do that eventually. And so the nice thing is, in the middle of the FAFSA, there will be some questions that say, if you have filed your tax return already, let's take you right to the IRS database, plug in your identifying information there, and transfer the information back. You can only do that that 3 weeks after you have filed your taxes electronically, and the IRS is ready to kind of with their startup. Because of the sequestration, a word that I thought I would never have to know, but because of sequestration in the fall, the IRS is about 3 weeks backed up. So even if you were to file your taxes today or tomorrow, they won't even look at them until the end of January, which means any of this information won't be available until at least the middle of February. So if you are, proactive enough to do that, the very earliest that you could do any kind of the data retrieval would be to the middle or end of February. Schools know that, and we're not unreasonable. We know that it's not possible to get the exact information out, which is again why I say just kind of estimate some of the information that it asks for you, and unless you're way off, it's not going to make a difference, to the bottom line. Again, it's be available in February. You don't have to do that. Colleges will strongly encourage you to do that. But if they ask you to update the information, it's either through the use of the IRS data retrieval tool or you requesting a paper tax return transcript from the IRS, getting that in the mail, and then giving that transcript to the financial aid office. So selfishly, the nice thing about the IRS data retrieval tool process is that once you click on a couple buttons, that's it, you're done, and we get the information, and we don't need to follow up with you. We don't need to ask for that transcript, and we don't need to look at the line items on the tax return and update your FAFSA for you. So it kind of saves us some keystrokes, which then will add, and only enhance the information that will get you very early on in the process. The other thing that you can do tonight, because you'll be so excited about wanting to do something as soon as you get out of here, to sign the FAFSA electronically, a parent needs a PIN number and a student needs a PIN number. You go to pin.ed.gov and you plug in your identifying information and you create your own PIN number. You can either get one randomly assigned to you or you can plug in your own 4-digit PIN number. It's that PIN that you'll use as a parent to sign the application electronically. The student also needs his or her own PIN, again the same pin.ed.gov, plugging in their identifying information to sign the application, with that 4-digit PIN. The nice thing is that recently, last couple of years, you are able to plug in your own 4-digit number if you want to. You can get one randomly assigned. If you wanted to have the same PIN for the student and the parent, that's fine too, because the identifying information is different, but at least it's the same 4 digits. God, the millions of passwords and stuff that we have these days, it's nice to be able to kind of streamline, some of those. The other nice thing about the PIN, I think it's too touchy. The other nice thing about the PIN is that for students especially, they can use that periodically to check through their lifetime as a student on the status of their financial aid, how much student loans they have, the student loan repayment, and a lot of colleges now ask the students to use their PIN as an electronic signature on campus to sign work-study time cards, to access some of their grades. The FAFSA on the web worksheet, which you have, is really nice. It walks through the FAFSA line item by line item. It's only 4 pages long. And again, it gives you some idea of what the questions are going to be. It doesn't go into a lot of detail with the help and some of the clarification, but at least you get some idea as to what kind of questions it's asking. When you get to the FAFSA on the web, this is one of the very first pages that you'll see. This is the home page for the FAFSA on the web. It will tell you to kind of start here, kind of start a new FAFSA, and then plug in some identifying information, the login information. Always starts with the student information. Because financial aid is all student-centered, this is a student application that also collects parent information. But anytime on this application it says you or your, it means the student. When it wants the parent's information, it will say your parents, or it'll be in a little different color as well. So it's a student who's logging in, putting in their login information, with their social security number, date of birth, creating a password for themselves, and then starting the FAFSA on the web. You'll get to a page where you have a lot more links on here that tells you, kind of where you are in the process, what you should be, thinking about, what kinds of information that it's going to collect. The progress bar also gives you an idea, throughout the process where you are in the application. Again, it's only 7 steps long, and it gives you some sense of, okay, first we're going to ask about, students' demographics, then we're going to ask about, the colleges that you want this sent to. It does a really good job of, telling you where you are in the process and not allowing you to skip to the next section until you've completed as much as you can, as much as applicable, and that you've saved this. So it will not allow you to go further in the application. Generally, the student information that's required on this is some identifying information like social security number, citizenship status, marital status, selective service registration. Male students who turn 18 still have to be registered with selective service. There's a movement, kind of a proposal to eliminate that because that's been around forever. And it's either going to eliminate that or it's going to add that all students, both male and female, need to register for selective service, which will never happen. So we do see within another year or so just that going away. But until it does, every male student, when they turn 18, has to register with selective service, either through an online application or going to the post office like we did, or on the FAFSA itself there will be a question that says, "Are you male?" It knows how old you are because of the birthday question, and it'll say, "Do you want us to register you with selective service through the FAFSA itself?" If a student said yes to that, that's all they need to do. That's the easiest way to do this. Still, that's what I recommend every student doing. This is the page. I got some screenshots in here that just literally show you the kinds of questions that it asks, the demographic kinds of address. Have you lived in the state for at least 5 years? What your email address is, driver's license number, if a student has that. It's this information that we get in a financial aid office that populates the financial aid system on our end that then begins us to start a file basically for the student so that we can kind of just go from there and contact the student and have some of this. The student eligibility determines that it's an eligible student that they are, if they're a male and they are 18, they have to be registered with selective service. If they're not, they can register through this. They've got to be a citizen or permanent resident. It asks where students went to school, high school, because a student needs to have a high school diploma or a GED in order to be an eligible student for some of the federal financial aid. So new, and this is the second year that this has been around, are the questions about not only, it went from did you graduate from high school to which high school did you graduate from? Literally, tell us where it was, put in the name. It will then populate the FAFSA that way. The next section will ask about kind of the school selection. Where do you want us to send this information? You can have information on the FAFSA, FAFSA result, sent to 10 schools, 10 colleges simultaneously. It's kind of weird. Technologically, I don't understand why it's limited to 10 schools. You would think an online application would be unlimited, but it's still kind of a throwback to the old paper days where it was just physical space that only allowed a certain number of colleges. So it's still only 10 colleges can be listed on the FAFSA that have FAFSA results sent to those schools. If for some reason, your son or daughter is applying to more than 10 schools, when the FAFSA gets processed initially and the results are sent to the colleges, you can go back in and add the additional schools. You can add 11, 12, 13, however many you want. But you need to wait for this first initial process, to go through. Every college has its own unique identifying number, the federal school code. That's what you're plugging in here so that we get the results. Not to be confused with, some like the University of Wisconsin system, for example. Every one of their campuses has a different code. So you want to make sure that if you don't know the code, that's one of the first things the college financial aid office will tell you what their federal school code is. You can go and do a search. You can put in the University of Wisconsin La Crosse, or University of Wisconsin Madison, or University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and get the federal school code. Every one will have its unique 6-digit code. At Lake Forest, ours is 001706, in case you needed to know that. Right? I'm just saying. It will list the schools then that you have plugged in and said, yeah, I want this information sent to these schools. It'll ask you, okay, if you go to that school, will you be looking on campus, off campus? We use that information to build a budget so that we know if a student's going to be a commuter or if they're going to be living in the residence hall. Again, as Ms. LePage said earlier, you're filling out the FAFSA now, even before you know if you have any chance of being admitted. If your student has any chance of being admitted to one of those colleges. We really want to run these processes on kind of parallel tracks. We cannot notify a student, a family, of their financial aid eligibility until and unless the student is admitted. But as soon as they're admitted, we want to be able to go out right away and say, great, we've gathered all this information. We have to wait for our admission office to say, yeah, the student is admissible, and then we send the financial aid letter. Some colleges will be able to give you an estimate before that, but nothing is binding and official until the student is actually admitted. But we absolutely don't want to wait for them to be admitted before you start the application process. Yeah?
Sorry for the interruption, but I wanted to get our impression that we can send the FAFSA to up to 10 schools. This package will pass out at 6. There is a change.
Yes. So that packet that you have says 6 schools because that's the paper. On the paper FAFSA, they only list 6 slots on there. The online has 10. Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. There are some questions that ask to determine whether the student is a dependent or an independent student. In a nutshell, unless the student is married, or they're 24 years old, or they're a veteran of the armed forces, or they're a graduate student, unless they meet some of those requirements, they are considered a dependent student. And as a dependent student, then it will say, okay, now we need parent information. So it will ask a whole series of questions, and as the student goes through and says, no to this one, and then these others will pop up and say, no to this one, no to this one. Once the student answers yes to any of these, those questions stop popping up and says, okay, so as soon as you answer yes, you're considered an independent student. But for all practical purposes, especially for tonight, we're probably looking at all dependent students. There will be cases where an 18-year-old wants to be considered independent or should be considered independent, but that's done on a case-by-case basis. The financial aid office will then follow up with the student and say, why? Why should we consider you independent? Why can you not provide parent information? Tell us a little bit more as to how you've been self-supporting. It's rare that it happens, but it absolutely happens, which is why it addresses some of the questions like, are you homeless or at risk of homelessness? Or are there other special circumstances that prevent you from providing parent information? If so, contact the financial aid office. We're the only ones who can then go in and kind of override the dependency determination, say, no, the student is independent, we're not going to ask for parent information. When it does ask for parent information, it really is very similar to the student. Kind of the demographic, the identifying information, the parents' names, social security number, date of birth, address. It then will ask questions about, how much income you had in 2013, what was your tax liability, how much untaxed income you had. When all is said and done, the FAFSA is more income-driven than anything else. However, it does still ask questions about assets. So not only will it ask questions about what was your income on your tax return, how much did you earn from work, other untaxed kinds of income, it will ask questions about how much you have in savings or investments. Do you own a business? How much is it worth? Do you have a farm? Are you working that farm? It excludes assets, as like home equity. It ignores home equity. You don't report that at all. It will ignore a business if you have less than 100 employees. You totally don't answer the question about business. It ignores any kind of life insurance policies or annuities or retirement accounts. It ignores all of that stuff and really is just asking about kind of cash on hand, money that you've got in savings or that in a checking account or on the mattress or wherever, the money that you have easy access to that will be used for college. It does include any kind of 529 plan. So if you've got like a College Illinois or lots of other, there are a lot of other programs that fall under the umbrella of 529 plans, and if you have one, you know what that is. It's the tax code. That's considered a parent asset, even though the student's name might be on it. It's considered a parent asset, and the value of it is what you would put under the parent information. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the question is, if you have multiple 529 plans for different kids, all of that combined is considered your asset. Yeah, so you're the owner of 2 or 3 or 4 different 529s. It's the value of that. The reason I say that, when all is said and done, the FAFSA, the eligibility is more income driven than anything else, unless you've got substantial dollars in a 529 plan or savings or other investments, unless it exceeds the net worth of about $150,000, it's as if you have nothing. It gets so diluted in the formula that unless you have more than about $40,000 or $50,000 in savings, it ignores that completely. So it will ask you, depending on the age of the older parent, it's one of the little formula things. If you have more than $40,000, don't even answer the asset questions. Or if you have less than $40,000, don't answer the asset questions. If you have more than $40,000, then let's talk. But really, unless you really start to have more than $150,000 or so, will it start to impact the bottom line. Last year, of all the FAFSAs that were processed, only 4% of them had assets enough to start to impact the eligibility. I predict that there will come a time within a couple years probably where asset questions are totally eliminated from this application. It's going to be more absolutely just solely income driven. And the other questions that are asked on here are the size of the family, how many kids you have, how many people are living at home, how many of your kids will be in college during the upcoming school year. When it asks about household size, it's kind of looking at under the same roof, or anybody that you're supporting. If you've got a child in college right now, yeah, they're living on campus perhaps 9 months out of the year, but when they're not living on campus, they're back at home with you, so you would include them. You would not include anybody who is over the age of 24 unless they are living at home and you are supporting them. If they're not working or going to school, it gets to be a little hazy, a little tricky, because technically that student, because they're 24, can be independent. But if you're supporting them, and the key is if you're giving more than 50% of your support to that student, then they're considered in the family size. Yeah.
Assets, would that include IRA or SEPs?
No, good question. Assets do not include any kind of retirement accounts, whether it's IRA, KEO, 401k, 403b, SEP, or anything like that at all. Yeah. Pardon me?
Prepaid tuition,
if you have a 529 plan, they will give you a statement as to what the value is, and that's what you use. It's really what you put into it, basically. It's the same thing, yeah.
You had said if you have a business, that it doesn't, they don't want you to listen. But when I read it, it said a business that's 50% or more than 50%.
Yeah, so the question is about business. There's two things. First, if you own a business and you are the majority kind of stakeholder, you own 51% of that business, then that's a business. Then you need to go to step 2 and say, do you have more than 100 employees? If you have less than 100 employees, then it's ignored. If you own 49% of the business, then it's ignored. You don't even need to go to step 2. Yeah.
What happens if the assets are in trust? Technically, you're only a beneficiary, but we have to leave.
Yeah, so if there's any kind of asset that's in trust and the student's name is on it, it's considered a student asset. Even if they don't have access to it, you need to list it under their name, and it's a case like that you need to talk to each of the individual colleges and say, yeah, technically this is under the student's name, but it's written into the trust that they may not have access to it until they're 25 or something like that. But initially, the first go-around, it's a student asset. Then you need to clarify it with each of the individual colleges.
What about the asset? They ask for parents' asset. It's technically not a.
No, you would not list it as a parent asset. Yeah, any asset, you want to also be careful, you're not duplicating assets. So you're not putting a 529 value under the parent and the student, or a trust under the parent or student. It's one place or the other. It has to be accounted for, but it's only in one place. Yeah. Hold that thought. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Yeah.
And my dad bought some shares in custody for my son. Is that his, or is that still my dad's?
Yeah, so if another person other than the parent has any kind of asset and the student's name is on there, it depends. I hate to answer every financial aid question with it depends. Sometimes I can. It depends on, we need to look at the technicality of that. If you say, if it's in trust, then it's still the student's asset. But if it's custody, it depends on the language of that. We'll have to come back to that. The question that we talked about, starting to collect some of the parents' demographic information, same kinds of questions that we see for the students. Parent's name, social security number, date of birth, address. And then it asks about the parent's income information. This is where, at this time of year, you cannot use the IRS data retrieval tool. Eventually you will, but until then, you're using your 2012 tax return as a guide to answer some of these questions. And again, it acts as a really nice cheat sheet where it says, we want to know what your adjusted gross income was, which is line 33 on a 1040, line 31 on a 1048. Really just kind of use that reference and use the 2012, or if you know that your 2012 income, your 2013 income is going to be 2, 3, 4, 5% higher than 2012, then just inflate those figures and put the higher figures on. The closer you estimate to the actual, the better early on in the process it is. But again, unless you're off by thousands of dollars, it really won't affect any kind of answers, any kind of eligibility. Once you do the, here's where it will prompt you and say, if it's been 3 weeks and you have filed your taxes electronically, and it's past the middle of February, it will then say, hey, do you want to use the IRS data retrieval tool? It will then say, fine, let's leave the FAFSA for a second. The FAFSA kind of stays open in the background. It takes you to the IRS site, and then just asks for your identifying information, just to authenticate who you are, asking you what your address is, what kind of tax return you filed, what your filing status was. It will then say, here you go. Here's the information we have on file at the IRS. What we see happen a lot, or happened a lot this past year at least, is parents would get to this point, but for some reason, the information would not transfer back to the FAFSA. So we get this little message on the FAFSA results in our office that says, parents use the IRS data retrieval tool, but no data was transferred. It's because that little box needs to be checked, yes, transfer my information. If you didn't check that box, and you clicked on the transfer now, it would send that it would not send that information across, but it would leave that page, so you wouldn't know that you didn't transfer the information. So, not to beat a dead horse, but really make sure that when you get to this page, look at that little checkbox and make sure that you're checking that and then transferring the information. Once that's done, you'll go right back to the FAFSA, and it will say, all of these questions that we're going to ask you, don't need to answer them because the information was transferred from the IRS.
The regular text page numbers. This page show family daily, take off the numbers that are relevant to FAFSA.
That's exactly right, yeah. Which is wonderful because, again, selfishly, if we have to look at a tax return in the financial aid office, we're looking at pages and pages, or really we only want like 5 or 6 different line items on there. So this only picks up those line items that are applicable, yeah, which is really nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question was, for example, if you're married filing separately, do you do this twice? No, there are some exceptions where you cannot use the IRS data retrieval tool. If you're married filing separately, you can't use it because only one tax return information can be brought in this way. So you have to go the alternate route of providing both tax returns to the financial aid office, unfortunately. The other exceptions to being able to use this tool are filing an amended return, or really that's about it. So it's married filing separately and filing.
Or divorce.
No, because if you're divorced and you're probably filing head of household if you're divorced. If you're filing married filing separately, then we don't consider you divorced. We look at that tax return status and say, well, you're married filing separately, you're married filing separately. If you're divorced, you should be filing as head of household.
But you still submit to tax?
No, so then you don't. No. I'll get to that question about divorce and separating.
So will this update when you file your 13 taxes?
Yeah, good question. Because you can't do this now, you can't do this until the end of February, but colleges will want you to do it as soon as you can. Let's say you file your taxes February 15th. So March 1st, you go back into the FAFSA yourself, and you'll be prompted to do so by the federal student aid programs. They will see that you did not use the IRS, and they'll send you out reminders, and colleges will know that you didn't use the DRT, and they'll send you reminders as well. So then you log back into the FAFSA and say, okay, I'm ready to do the DRT. You click on that link, and it will automatically update the information for you. So, you'll be prompted. You'll get some gentle nudges all along the way. Yeah.
The best scenario is you can't have your taxes for 2013 filed so that the additional reference is well. If you know everything for what you got from employer, W-2s and all of that stuff.
The absolute best situation, yeah, if there's any possible way in the world you can get your tax return done before you start to file the FAFSA, do it, if there's any way that you can. The tricky part is going to be there are some schools that say we need the FAFSA results by January 31st because these schools they're inundated with applications, they have limited dollars, they need this information early. You may not get your W-2 form, so physically you may not be able to do it. But if you're looking at schools that say, hey, get this FAFSA done by February 15th or March 1st, that does give you some time to collect this information. And if you've got someone else doing this for you, maybe box some Pringle mints to them to bribe them, or cookies or something, please. As a parent of a college student, I really need to get this done. So, yeah. No, we don't include any kind of home equity or anything like that. We also do not include any kinds of expenses like home equity loans or consumer lines of credit or consumer debt. In the formula, it's recognizing kind of a basic standard of living that's the best it can do to start the process. So it's just kind of calculating, not taking any kind of consumer debt into account, but a cost of living. And especially in knowing the different parts of the country where the cost of living is very different here than it might be in Decorah, Iowa, which might be very different than in Pasadena, California. So that's taken into account, but specific questions that it addresses about your expenses is not.
Let's say you file FAFSA by the end of January, or something you wanted to. You file the real electronic tax return by the end of March. You mentioned the word automatic. Does FAFSA automatically update March 31st actual numbers in each school that is similar to the original?
So the question is, you file the FAFSA by January 31st, or and then you get your taxes done by the end of March, or by March 1st. The FAFSA doesn't automatically update that information. You need to proactively go back into the FAFSA and say, yeah, I want to update this information. You link to the IRS and pull that information in. Once you do that, Then each of the schools that you have listed on the FAFSA, we get new results. We get this that says, hey, this family updated their information. We love it. We say, God bless you for doing that. Let's go forth and give you a better financial aid, answer more final than just the estimate that we based it on. So, yeah.
Students who apply to schools. So when you're doing the higher pre-roll, you have to wait again till that's finished and then go back and do schools again.
No, this is a good question. If you're applying to if your student is applying to more than 10 colleges, once you do the IRS data retrieval, the FAFSA in and of itself is updated. So if you added a school before you did that update, then you need to, If you added a school before you did that update, then you need to go back in and kind of take that school out and add the other school back in. It's very tricky. It boggles my mind that technologically we can't have an unlimited number of schools on here. So I would suggest that once you get the FAFSA done and you're adding an 11th or 12th school, what you're doing literally is you're replacing one of the initial 10 schools with the 11th school and the 12th school. So that school initially who got this won't get the update because they're removed from the application. Again, which is kind of weird, but that's just the way it happens. So if you're going to use the data retrieval tool, make sure that when you're doing it, the 10 schools you have on there are really truly the 10 schools that are in the running. If there are schools that by that time that you've done it, the student has not been accepted or has been denied admission, take that school out, and add the other school in there. So just make sure that the 10 schools are the schools that really are still in the running. Yeah. Follow up.
There's a limit of 10.
There is a limit of 10. Yeah.
You can't, do your 10 schools, you do 5 more.
Uh-huh.
15 schools altogether, and 5 of those are gone. Then when you do your data retrieval, you're doing it for the latter.
Yeah, you're doing, when you
Go
do,
back and add other ones again.
You can.
And then do data retrieval.
yeah, so once you do the data retrieval, you've done it. And any schools that were on the FAFSA at that time got that information. If you add another school back in, you don't have to do the data retrieval again because you've already done it. The FAFSA is already updated. So at that moment that you're adding another school to an updated FAFSA, the school knows that you already did that. So.
You don't have to use the electronic. If I want to go back in and do it by hand after I've done my taxes, that's fine.
Yes, absolutely. The question is, this is all voluntary. You don't have to do this. You can go back in and using your 2013 tax return, plug in the actual numbers, but then the college will say, we want a copy of your tax return transcript that came from the IRS itself. Let me throw a wrench into all this too, not to confuse this exciting process even more, but truly, between us, there's a 30% chance, there's about a 35% chance that you will absolutely be required to update your information, your income information on here. It's this process called verification. It's really just kind of a random sample, but they really randomly sample only about 35% of all the applications. So there is a chance, I would be less than honest with you if I didn't tell you that. If you did this and used estimated information, if you're not selected for verification, you don't have to update your information. But if you are selected for verification, you absolutely need to update it. You absolutely must. Whether you do the data retrieval tool or you get a transcript from the IRS and give that to the college, either one of those will suffice. Yeah. Good question. Let's hold that thought for a second too. I got so much more exciting stuff to share with you. Yeah.
Real quickly, for county schools,
Sure.
he's under 10 school, but he's going to settle. So then he is still applying to schools, and he go in and just add those in at any time, as long as we can over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. If he knows that there's going to be 9 schools, eventually add all 9. Even if he hasn't applied to one of those schools yet, add them in at this moment. We'll get the results. We will sit on it because we'll know that
either we don't have an admission application or hasn't been admitted yet, won't do anything with it. But it's nice to at least have that information, in-house. So.
Again, the same kinds of questions will be asked of the student that's asked of the parents. It's kind of like the questions are mirrored for both the student and the parents. So again, the same information about the student. If they file a tax return, it's going to want to know, how much income they had, and can they use the data retrieval tool and kind of plug that information in itself as well. Then you'll get to the page where you sign this electronically, using the PIN number. You submit this electronically, and you get the confirmation report back. You will see, I think I've got, where it'll ask, for example, for the parent signature, who is signing this electronically? If you indicated that parents are married, that there's a two-parent household, which parent do you want to sign this? Only one needs to sign electronically. Both can have PIN numbers. If you wanted to both have PIN numbers, that's fine. But you indicate which one is signing this. The language is changing. By the time you get to this application, because of the Defense of Marriage Act, all of the parent questions on here now relate to, they've taken out father, mother, stepmother, stepfather, and changed them with parent 1 and parent 2. So it will ask you which parent, parent 1 or parent 2, and it will tell you, here's the information we have for parent 1, here's their name, their social security number, are they signing this electronically? Then plug in, their PIN number here. You'll sign it, you'll submit the FAFSA, it will be processed, you'll get the confirmation page that says congratulations, you fill out everything that you need to do. Once you get to this point, you can rest assured that we will get these results within 24 to 48 hours. I've never, knock wood, I've never, since the FAFSA on the web has been available, I've never ever seen a loss of data or lost in cyberspace or security breach or identity theft or anything like that. It's a very secure site, and once you get to this point, you know that we will have this information. Give us a little bit of time, to kind of pull it into our system, but feel free to call the college and say, hey, I got my confirmation that the FAFSA has been processed. Just want to make sure that you got it, that all the 10 schools, have received this information as well. One of the nice things, it doesn't take a lot to excite us in a financial aid office, but there is kind of a new feature that allows you, if you've got more than one child in college, you are filling out one FAFSA for every child because it's student specific. So if you're filling out 2 FAFSAs, by the time you get done with one, there's this feature on there that allows you to transfer the parent information from one FAFSA to the next. So you don't have to start, from scratch. So then you're only plugging in the other student's information on the new FAFSA. The other nice thing that you'll see on this confirmation page, just to give you some sense of what's going on in terms of kind of evaluating colleges, through some recent law changes, it says, okay, here's the schools that we have that we're sending this information to. Let me give you a little bit of detail about some of these schools, what their retention rate is, what their graduation rate is. You'll be able to click on a couple other links that give you more background information about each of these colleges. It will also, at this point, give you something called an expected family contribution. Very early on in this presentation, I talked about the FAFSA creating an index number of sorts. It's kind of called an index number. I call it an index number. It used to be called an index number. I've been doing this for over 30 years, and it's evolved from something called the Pell Grant Index to the Student Aid Index to something that's currently called the expected family contribution. It's not really an expected family contribution. It's not a dollar amount, and eventually we hear it's going back to be called an index number because it really is just a sense of where in the big picture you fall if you absolutely qualify for a federal grant or you don't. It's the college that ultimately will tell you with its financial aid award letter what your expected family contribution is. At this stage of the game, it's really preliminary, but it does give you some information early on that says, hey, your index number, your expected family contribution was low enough so that you qualify for federal grants. It could be legit, it may not be. It could be that there was a keystroke error, and instead of $100,000 of income, you just put $10,000 of income in there. That will be caught, as I talked about, in that verification process and that update process. And so the confirmation page that you get right now is really just
a confirmation page that says the data has been submitted electronically, now talk to your college. A couple FAFSA areas, challenges, errors, whatever you want to call them. Social Security numbers, a lot of times that we see numbers transposed, or parents who are filling out the student section, putting in the parent, Social Security number, where it really should be the student Social Security number. Be very careful with Social Security numbers because that triggers a lot of things. That identifies a student in the financial aid office. It also sets off a number of triggers, kind of edits on the FAFSA end. It's the student Social Security number that gets compared to the selective service database. If the student is male and they're 18 years old, it will check to see if that student is registered with selective service. It will check the Department of Homeland Security to see if the student is a citizen or a permanent resident. It will check the student's name against their Social Security number, against their date of birth to make sure that that student belongs to that Social Security number. If I were filling this out, I would have to be very careful that I didn't put Jerry Sabrinsky on there. I'd have to put Gerard Sabrinsky, my given name, because if I put Jerry, it would come back with this mismatch. Like, that Social Security number, that date of birth does not belong to a Jerry, it belongs to somebody else. What's going on? So be very careful, with those numbers. When it asks about parents' information, the question earlier was about divorced or remarried. If parents are divorced, then it's only the student, and hasn't been remarried, it's only the parent with whom the student lives or has lived with the most over the last 12 months. It's only that parent who puts his or her information on this application. Kind of period on the story. It doesn't care at this stage of the game about the other parent. Some colleges may care and may follow up separately to say, okay, it's only one parent here. What about the other parent? Is there some kind of agreement that they might be paying some of the college costs? But at this stage, it's really only the parent with whom the student lives. And it goes back to who the student lives with the most over the last 12 months. If some parents have kind of a shared custody at a 50-50, the nice thing is that there are 365 days of the year. So it literally cannot be, unless the student on one of those days is 12 hours with mom, 12 hours with dad, one of those parents has the student for technically more than 50%. In the case of a parent who has remarried, the step parent's information is required on this application. Again, regardless of any kinds of prenuptial agreements or informal agreements, the step parents, because we're looking at kind of the household information, residential, who's under the same roof, all the resources literally in that house. On the flip side of that, if the step parent has obligations of his or her own to other family members, that's also recognized. So not only do we recognize the income, we may recognize that there might be some child support, or alimony going out, the other way. Untaxed income, again, if you do the data retrieval tool, you don't have to worry about the untaxed income and the income tax paid, questions like that. It just will do it automatically for you. Untaxed income is just really looking at other kinds of questions on the tax return, like untaxed dividend or interest income, contributions to an IRA or a KEO. The tax, U.S. income tax paid question is not how much was withheld, but literally for the tax table, how much is the government keeping? That's that question specifically. Yeah.
They don't file their own 1040, right?
So if a student doesn't file their own 1040, you are not including their information on your 1040. The taxpayer is only their information, and if you're married, filing jointly, then you're putting your and your wife's information on there. You are not including students' information. You never include, a student's information on your own tax return. If they file a tax return, great. If they don't, they don't file. There's a question that says, will you file or not? A lot of students don't even have income. So no, you wouldn't have to worry about that. Household size, the number of kids in the family. We talked a little bit about who all is living at home, who you're supporting at least half of the time, half of your support is coming from you. And of those people, how many, other than the parent, how many of your kids will be in college at least half-time during the upcoming school year. And then the real estate investment, the net worth, the asset kinds of questions, disregarding home equity, annuities, retirement accounts. It's really just kind of the cash on hand. When the FAFSA gets processed, students are notified, families are notified by email. So here's kind of a tricky part and kind of a hot topic and a question to ask colleges. What happens is that when we get the results of the FAFSA is asking for the student's email address and the parent's email address. That populates into our system. And a lot of schools, and especially the federal government, will just communicate with the student using the student's email address. Like, how often do students check their email? Not so much. We, all the time. Maybe someone's checking their email now. I'm okay with that. The tricky part is all about communicating, and that's one of the hot topics these days. Communicating effectively, because some of this information is very time sensitive. And if you don't respond to an email within 24 hours, you could be out thousands of dollars. So there's the questions on the FAFSA that ask for the student's email and the parent's email. There are some families that create an email account just for this purpose. It's the same email that populates in both, and that's fine. As long as it's going into an account that somebody is reading periodically, making sure that if something needs to be done, something is done. The other thing is, because this is student-centered, it's student financial aid, a lot of colleges are very conservative when it comes to FERPA and privacy laws, and will only communicate with the student. So it may only use the student's email address and won't copy the parent's email address on there. That's a good question for you to ask colleges as to how you will be kept in the loop with communication. Will you be copied on some of these emails? Do they have your email? Or do you need to give specific information to the college? Say, yes, please include me. Most colleges, like Lake Forest, we automatically include the parents because they are dependents of you. It's just common sense. Some are like, oh, well, we're scared of this whole privacy thing. We're only going to do the parent, only the student, unless they tell us differently. But yeah, did you? That's absolutely fine. Yeah, not a problem. The other thing is, communicating effectively. With students, we know they don't check their email, but we need to get a hold of them sometimes. So, colleges, like we talk about different ways that we can communicate with students. We've talked about everything from our own Facebook page, which we're probably not going to do because my fear is that nobody will like us. They won't friend us. How pathetic will we be? We're not going to tweet because I don't know how. We might. So we have a social media meeting at the college on Friday morning where they're going to talk about Twitter accounts. Lucky I even know the difference between a Twitter and tweet and how to use that effectively. What we have done, and we'll continue to do more, is text the student because we know that's all they do is text. I've had students in my office who, quite honestly, they've come in, we've been talking, and they're sitting at my desk, and I see them. You look down, and I see their hands moving. I know that they're texting while I'm supposed to be talking to them. That's fine. We will text them, and we'll send them a text that says, check your email. There's something out there that you need to respond to, period, end of story. But a good question, to ask colleges throughout this process is how to stay informed. How do you stay informed, especially as parents? Do you need to do something proactively to make sure you're CC'd on some of this information? And what is the best way, if it is by email or by text or Facebook or tweeting? We get the results, again, within 48 to 72 hours. We sit on it, we start to look at it, and once we know that student is admissible, or we kind of get the go-ahead from the admission office saying, yeah, we'll send out their letter eventually, but this is going to be a student that we will admit. Then we start to evaluate it. Then we kind of take a look at creating a financial aid award letter. When you get the student aid report, you also, at the same time we do, you get that summary. Eyeball it and make sure that if anything looks weird, you're doing the data entry. So if the income shows up as $1 million and it really was supposed to be $100,000, make that change because Otherwise, we're going to base everything on you making $1 million. There's a couple of ways that you can do that. You can go back online to the FAFSA on the web and make that change yourself. But better yet is for you to contact the college, the individual colleges, and it might be that you're contacting 12 colleges. But tell us what the change is, and we can do it instantly for you, and not have to wait for a new FAFSA, results to come in for you to go back online. We can do that, and even if income was off by $1,000, we can make that change and say, that's fine, thank you. It's not going to make a difference anyway. Again, making the corrections is going back online or contacting the school. We encourage you to do that. The FAFSA is a good enough application. It really is cut and dry. It doesn't allow you to color outside the lines or stream of consciousness or diarrhea of the mouth or anything like that. It's enough to start the process to kind of give us a general idea of where you're coming from. Well, we know, and from the statistics I've done in my office, almost 2/3 of all of our families who fill out a FAFSA have something else to report. There's some kind of special circumstance that impacts their ability to contribute. So any of these special circumstances we want to know about, whether it's through the use of a supplemental financial aid application. There's a common one called the College Scholarship Service Financial Aid Application, Financial Aid Profile, that about 300 colleges use. That asks you, great, here's the FAFSA, here's what your income was in 2013, you have 2 kids in college, tell us more. Will there be less income next year? Did you pay a lot of medical expenses? Are you paying support to grandparents? Did you have emergency home repairs? We're seeing a lot of, from those tornadoes just this past fall, in kind of central Illinois, we've got some students who are affected by that. It's taking that into account because what a financial aid office is trying to do is really to tailor-make their response back to the family, taking everything we can into consideration. The FAFSA does not address that at all. It's only through the use of the common financial aid application, or more likely than not, the school's own application for financial aid, or some kind of standalone form that they have that will allow you to tell us there's more going on. In the world of financial aid, there's no such thing as TMI. There might be sometimes, but really we want to know everything that we possibly can to take into consideration. There's a variety of things that we can do, whether it's loss of income or medical expenses, emergency home repair. Just talk to each of the colleges. They will tell you what you need to do to share that information with them. We almost all have a standalone form that you'll fill out. Everything is about documentation, 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 and we can never really do anything unless we have an audit trail. So it looks like we were prompted by you to make a change. We in the financial aid office kind of have this kind of godlike authority where we are the ultimate decision maker. Whatever we say goes. We determine federal eligibility. We determine state and institutional eligibility based on all the information that you've given us. Before that time, it's just a matter of collecting and gathering this information. But let us know if there's something else going on that impacts your ability to contribute. Yeah. Yeah, at some of the highly selective colleges, Northwestern, USC, University of Michigan, they require the profile, and almost always that's due early in the fall sometime. So that could very well be. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, we have to start with kind of the baseline. We start with what 2013 was like, but then we can amend that. We can adjust and say, yeah, 2013 there was income of $100,000. However, half of that was from a capital gain or overtime or another parent who's no longer around. We start with the actual information, but we end up with what's more current, what's more reasonable, and consistent. Lots of places that you can get help. The FAFSA form itself is really nice. I really like the links on there. It has grown leaps and bounds in terms of being user-friendly. There's lots of places on the FAFSA form itself when you get there. If you want to have links up to studentaid.gov, help, there's online help, there's kind of the chat, kind of online chat help. Ms. Page talked about FAFSA workshops that she and David at North, will be hosting in the end of this month and early February. This gives you some ideas about what's going on in terms of the federal government. And then certainly you have got a wealth of knowledge here at South and at North. Both Ms. Page and Mr. Boyle are wonderful, wonderful. They have great resources. David Boyle used to work at Lake Forest College in the admissions office, and so I've known him for 20 years. I hope that I've taught him well throughout that process. And the same thing. The nice thing, I got to tell you, I love what I do. I love doing these kind of programs. I love answering questions. I love clarifying stuff. They've got my number. And if you came into them and said, I've got this question, even though you may not be interested in Lake Forest College, that's fine. Maybe you are, though. Even if you're not interested in Lake Forest College, they'll call me and they'll say, hey, this parent has a question. I don't know the answer to it. I will help you. I will help answer that question. They can also point you in the right direction for other kind of resources that are available out there. I've got a couple of websites on here that I like. College Zone is the state's, the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, it's their website. Finaid.org is a really good website too. That's sponsored by the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. So it's kind of the not-for-profit. There's nobody sponsoring this other than all of us financial aid administrators out there. It's a pretty dense website. When you first look at it, lots of words, but it's a lot of information. I especially like some of the calculators that are out there and some of the outside scholarship information that you can find, not only about the legitimate ones that are out there, but also some of the scams that have been happening. There's a scholarship, the Robert Sterling Scholarship Foundation in England that has been sending information to students. Unfortunately, this past fall, a few of our students at the college were affected by the scholarship. I don't know how this foundation did it, but they would send a student a check, a $5,000 check, and say, hey, congratulations, you won the scholarship, but when you deposit this, make sure that you send us money back for processing and postage and handling, and we'll give you a bank account. You tell us what your routing number is, and we'll deduct it from your bank account. Oh my God, we've had a couple students negatively impacted to identity theft. It's just really, really sad. So please be very, very careful about some of this unsolicited information that you might get out there. You should never have to pay for this. This really, truly is an easy enough and straightforward enough process and enough information out there with the counseling staff here and all the financial aid offices that you shouldn't have to pay anybody to get answers to some of your questions or to kind of help you down the road. Oh, okay. Did I talk too much? Did I tell you everything that you ever wanted to hear about financial aid? We've got a couple of questions. I won't be able to stick around after this. I've got to run to O'Hare to pick up my sister is flying into town. But let's maybe spend 5 minutes or so answering any kind of general questions. I may have answered all of them already, right? Right? Anybody? Yeah, Ben.
Money that comes out of your paycheck you pay for your medical insurance.
The question is about untaxed income and whether that includes, some of the monies that are paid into a retirement account or kind of what's called a cafeteria plan, kind of insurance things. No, it doesn't. It's very specific in terms of untaxed income. It's only the income that shows up basically on the front of a tax return. There's a couple sections on there, a couple line items that say if you have, for example, dividend income, how much did you receive, how much was taxable, the difference is untaxable. So it's very specific. There are not a lot of untaxed income that it's asking for, so the FAFSA will tell you exactly what it's looking for. Yeah. Yeah, good question about whether you have like one child or two or three in college. If you have one child in college and you're applying for them, fine, easy enough process. If you have two kids in college and you're applying for both of them, you're filling out two FAFSAs. Literally what's happening in this process, with the formula, when we look at this whole process, we're just kind of determining how much a family could contribute. And initially, we're looking at how much they can pay if they had one child in college. If you have two kids in college, that dollar amount really gets halved. So we're saying, okay, half goes to one, half goes to the other, so your chances for financial aid at each of the individual schools increases. If you have two kids in college, but you only want to apply for financial aid for one of them, I wouldn't. If that's what you're asking me, if you were my family member, I'd say, why? What are you thinking? No, apply for all the kids you have in college, even if so again, between us. One of the questions asked, how many kids you have in college? It doesn't ask where they're going. You could have one who's coming to Lake Forest College, and one going to College of Lake County. The costs are very, very different, but the formula divides it in half. It doesn't take into account that, you won't get any financial aid at CLC. You probably pay for that yourself. However, the formula in and of itself just divides it in half anyway. So it's kind of weird, but to your advantage to do that. Yeah, back there, sir.
Someone at school where he went away for senior year to prep school. He's living there, plans on living there all summer. This is a different kind of financial aid, but can he get in-state residency in Ohio?
It's a good question. It's kind of weird. I'm working on a paper, kind of not a paper, but a resource that talks about, because I get that question a lot, of all the different states and what their requirements are. I'm not up to Ohio yet, so I don't know what Ohio is exactly, but Missouri, a student has to just live there for a year to then get in-state, just has to go to school there for a year, and then they could technically apply as an in-state, student. I haven't got to Iowa. No, I've done the easy ones first, like in the end of them. Yeah, then.
I know that I have a business, I know my income is going to be different from last year. It could be $1,000 last year, it could be $20,000. And with the business, the paperwork's not even completely close enough. Am I better estimating high and then going back and saying I was wrong, it's this much lower, or estimating low and then going back and saying it's much higher? I mean, I don't want to lie,
Right,
but I don't
right.
want to mess myself up.
Yeah, that's a good question, because we see that a lot. People who are self-employed or have some kind of business. If it were me, or if you were my sister, and I was saying, estimate low to get more financial aid up front. It's easier for us to take money away and say, no, your income was, you really made $20,000 more. It's so much easier for us to take it away than to try to give it to you later on. By the time you know what it was, we could be out. So let's save that money for you, knowing that if your income is thousands of dollars more, you may not get as much. But it's much easier to do that than for you to say, oh my God, I overestimated. Can I get more? We might have to say no, unfortunately. Our resources might be not at all. No, absolutely not. We don't, yeah.
Early decision, finding unless financial, so you get your financial information sooner because it is finding, so if it's going to work out, you go over it.
You do, right? Either your kids applying early decision?
Yeah.
Okay. They should have gotten some information already. Okay. So every year, the colleges add different things. Even we have added early decision 2 this year. We have early action, and early action 2. And we have early action binding, early action not binding. No said. You will get some kind of financial aid answer if you're going early decision before you make that binding decision. And you can count on that unless something dramatic changes for whatever reason. But a change in financial aid eligibility is really the only out for an early decision. Yeah, certainly.
In case you have two as household that are entrepreneurs, instead of case you have 2/3 of your FAFSA applicants that need that amendment we're talking to. So I had a stellar year 2 years ago, but it's been really rock hard difficult last year and a half, 2 years. That'd be where we would things in and then have a conversation with the office.
That's exactly right, yeah. And especially, for entrepreneurs or, self-employed, what a lot of schools do, and what we've been doing sometimes too, is not only looking at, last year and this coming year, but kind of looking at a 2 or 3 year average. I mean, the economy in the last 5, 6, 10 years has been all over the place, and it's not where we want it to be. So, we may ask you not only for last year and this year, but the upcoming year, and let's go back to 2011. And let's maybe kind of do a 5-year average, if that helps. It will only, any of this information will only help. It will never be a detriment to you. Colleges will never select this and say, we're not going to give you as much because we think that in 3 years you're going to be millionaires. Well, who knows? So, but that would be a good reason to talk to a financial aid office, yeah.
So if he qualifies, why? Is it justified?
Yeah, so if a student qualifies for financial aid, it depends. There are some programs that are specifically just for tuition, and there are some, like student loans, that can cover room and board. Almost every grant or scholarship, any of the free money, the gift aid that you receive, will never exceed tuition and fees. Anything above and beyond that will be more in the form of student loans and work study. The only exception to that might be outside scholarships. I'm passionate about outside scholarships. Students who apply and find some dollars from foundations or organizations, when they bring those in, 99% of the time, it only helps them. It's in addition to what they're already receiving. So it could be, and we've seen this a couple times, we've had some students who have gotten, and they need it, enough financial aid from us to cover all their tuition, and have also brought in outside scholarships to help with their room and board. I have a student who, she's a sophomore this year. Last year when she called me over the summer, to say that she was getting 3 outside scholarships. She said, I've got one for $1,000, one for $2,000, and one for $25,000. I said, you mean $2,500? She goes, no, $25,000. $25,000 for a year, and she's getting that. She absolutely deserves it. We didn't discount any of our scholarships and grants that she was getting because she needed that. This is what helped her with some of her room and board and books and miscellaneous. So, no, you know what? It will never be detrimental. It's always a win-win situation. Last question.
If a grandparent set up a 529, does that not count as FAFSA with their?
Right, if a grandparent or any kind of other family member set up a 529 plan, it does not count. We're only looking at parents and students' information in all of this. So,
if there is a special circumstance, do you contact the college through the admissions counselor, or do you go directly to the financial aid office?
Either one. If you've got a relationship with the admission counselor, they're your first point of contact. Talk to them. They may help a little bit, but then they'll probably refer you to the financial aid office or call the financial aid office directly. Thank you all very, very much. Thanks for. Sorry I can't stick around, but good luck.
Long drive.
Quick question. Business, usually businesses are valued at basic earnings, fixed times earnings. Businesses